Commander Marcus Chen stood in the center of the pristine white courtroom, his hands bound behind his back with energy shackles that hummed with alien technology. The 12 members of the Galactic Council sat on their raised platform, their various alien forms casting long shadows across the crystalline floor. Some had multiple eyes that blinked independently, others possessed tentacles that writhed with barely contained emotion, and a few looked almost human except for their unnaturally pale skin and silver hair. The lead counselor, a tall being with forearms and skin like polished obsidian, spoke in a voice that resonated through universal translators. Marcus Chen of Earth, you stand accused of violating the sacred doctrine of non-interference during the Kepler 442b incident. Marcus lifted his chin defiantly. 3 months ago, he had been part of a joint human-alien exploration mission to survey new worlds for potential colonization, when they discovered a primitive species being hunted to extinction by aggressive predators. Marcus had acted against direct orders. While his alien teammates debated protocol and filed reports, he had grabbed a plasma rifle and driven off the predators, saving dozens of innocent lives. The defendant willfully ignored direct commands from superior officers, continued another counselor, this one resembling a giant mantis with iridescent wings. His reckless actions could have disrupted the natural evolution of an entire species. I saved lives, Marcus said simply. That's what humans do. A ripple of disapproval swept through the council chamber. The obsidian-skinned leader's 4 eyes narrowed. This is precisely why your species remains on probationary status. Humans are too emotional, too impulsive. You act before thinking, never considering the larger consequences. Marcus had heard this criticism countless times since humanity joined the galactic community 50 years ago. Other species viewed humans as primitives who had stumbled into space travel too quickly. They were tolerated but never truly accepted, always watched with suspicion and barely concealed contempt. The council has reached its decision, announced a counselor who looked like a living tree with bark-covered skin and branches for arms. Marcus Chen, you are hereby stripped of your rank and expelled from the Galactic Defense Force. Furthermore, you will be exiled to the desert world of Xerion 7, where you will remain for no less than 25 standard years. The courtroom fell silent except for the soft hum of the energy shackles. Xerion 7 was notorious throughout the galaxy as a punishment world, a harsh desert planet where the Council sent criminals and dissidents to die slowly under twin suns. No one had ever been known to survive more than a few years there. You cannot be serious, said Ambassador Williams, the sole human representative present. She was a dignified woman in her 60s who had spent decades trying to improve humanity's standing with the other species. 25 years on Xerion 7 is a death sentence. Perhaps, replied the Obsidian leader with what might have been a smile. But if humans are truly as resilient as they claim, then Mr. Chen should have no difficulty surviving. Consider it a test of your species' worthiness. Marcus understood the game being played. The council wanted him to fail, to prove that humans were weak and deserved their second-class status. His death would serve as a convenient excuse to further restrict human activities in galactic space. I accept the sentence, Marcus said firmly, ignoring Ambassador Williams' sharp intake of breath. But when I survive your little test, I want humanity's full membership in the council. Several counselors made sounds that might have been laughter. Agreed, said the leader. Though the point is academic, as you will be dead within 6 months. The trial concluded with ceremonial efficiency. Marcus was escorted to a detention facility where he spent 3 days in a small cell, given basic survival gear and a crash course on Xerion 7's environment. The prison guards, a species of blue-skinned humanoids with gills, treated him with a mixture of pity and amusement. Desert planet, one guard explained in broken standard as he handed Marcus a survival pack. Very hot, very dry. Many dangerous creatures. You die quick, maybe suffer less. The survival pack contained a basic shelter unit, water purification tablets, emergency rations for 2 weeks, a multi-tool, and a small medical kit. It was barely enough to last a month, let alone 25 years. On the 4th day, Marcus was loaded onto a prison transport ship, along with a dozen other exiles from various species. Most were actual criminals, murderers, thieves, and political dissidents who had crossed their respective governments. They eyed Marcus with curiosity, having heard about the human who had defied the council. The journey to Xerion 7 took 2 weeks through hyperspace. Marcus spent the time exercising in his cell and reviewing everything he knew about desert survival. Earth had many harsh environments, and human military training had prepared him for extreme conditions. But Xerion 7 was in a class by itself. According to the ship's database, the planet had no indigenous intelligent life, though it hosted various dangerous predators adapted to the desert environment. The surface temperature reached 50 degrees Celsius during the day and dropped below freezing at night. Sandstorms were common, and the twin suns bathed everything in harsh radiation. When the transport finally arrived at Xerion 7, Marcus got his first look at his new home through the ship's viewports. The planet was a swirling mass of tan and orange, with massive storm systems visible even from orbit. No green vegetation could be seen anywhere, just endless expanses of sand and rock formations. The drop-off procedure was brutally simple. The ship entered the atmosphere and hovered 50 meters above a relatively flat section of desert. Each exile was pushed out of an airlock with their survival gear, left to fall into the sand below. The ship departed immediately, leaving no trace of its presence except for the scattered figures struggling to their feet in the blazing heat. Marcus landed hard, rolling to absorb the impact as his military training had taught him. Around him, other exiles were picking themselves up and staggering away in different directions, each seeking their own path to survival or death. As the twin suns beat down mercilessly and the wind began to pick up, carrying stinging sand across the landscape, Marcus shouldered his pack and began walking toward a distant rock formation. The council expected him to die here, but they had made one crucial mistake in their judgment. They had underestimated what it truly meant to be human. The first 3 days on Xerion 7 nearly killed Marcus Chen. The desert was a living hell of extremes that would have broken most sentient beings within hours. During the day, the twin suns turned the sand into a furnace that could cook flesh through his survival suit. At night, the temperature plummeted so drastically that without shelter, hypothermia would claim him before dawn. Marcus had made it to the rock formation he had spotted during his drop, a towering mesa that provided some blessed shade during the worst heat of the day. He had deployed his emergency shelter in a small cave he found near the base, a cramped space barely large enough for one person, but offering protection from both temperature extremes and the violent sandstorms that swept across the landscape twice daily. Water was his biggest concern. The purification tablets could clean any liquid he found, but finding liquid on this wasteland was proving nearly impossible. On his second day, he had discovered a small seepage in the cave wall where moisture collected drop by drop. It was barely enough to keep him alive, forcing him to ration every precious drop while his body screamed for more. Food was becoming an issue too. His emergency rations would last another week if he continued eating half portions, but his body was already feeling the effects of dehydration and insufficient calories. He needed to find a sustainable source of both water and nutrition, or the council would get their wished-for death sentence after all. But Marcus had not survived 3 tours in Earth's most hostile environments by giving up easily. On the 4th morning, as the first sun crested the horizon and painted the desert in shades of orange and gold, he ventured further from his shelter than he had dared before. He was looking for signs of life, any life that might point him toward water or food sources. The mesa proved to be larger than he had initially thought, stretching for several kilometers in each direction and riddled with caves and crevices. As he explored, Marcus began to notice things that his desperate first days had caused him to miss. Scratch marks on some of the rocks suggested that creatures did live here, probably nocturnal animals that emerged only when the temperature dropped. More importantly, he found dried vegetation in some of the deeper ravines, plants that had somehow adapted to survive in this harsh environment. Where there were plants, there had to be water somewhere nearby. Marcus spent the day mapping the area around his shelter, marking locations where he found signs of life and noting the direction of water stains on rock faces that indicated occasional rainfall runoff. By evening, he had identified 3 promising areas to investigate more thoroughly. That night, as the temperature dropped and the desert became almost bearable, Marcus heard something that made his heart race with excitement: howling. It was distant and alien, unlike anything he had heard on Earth, but it was definitely the sound of living creatures communicating with each other. He waited until the middle of the night, when both suns had set and the desert was at its coolest. then ventured out with his multi-tool configured as a makeshift torch. Following the sounds, he made his way carefully through the rocky terrain, using his military tracking skills to move silently despite the loose gravel and shifting sand. What he found, in a valley between two smaller mesas, changed everything. A pack of six-legged creatures about the size of large dogs was gathered around what appeared to be a water source. In the dim light of his torch, Marcus could see they had sleek, sand-colored fur and elongated snouts filled with sharp teeth. They moved with the fluid grace of predators perfectly adapted to their environment. But more importantly, they were drinking from a natural spring that bubbled up from underground and formed a small pool before disappearing back into the sand. Real flowing water in the middle of this desert wasteland. The creatures noticed his light and turned as one to stare at him with large, reflective eyes. For a moment, human and aliens faced each other in tense silence. Marcus slowly reached for the plasma pistol in his survival kit, knowing that these predators could easily tear him apart if they decided he was either a threat or a meal. But instead of attacking, the pack leader, a slightly larger specimen with scars across its muzzle, made a low warbling sound and backed away from the water. The others followed suit, retreating to a respectful distance but not fleeing entirely. They seemed to be giving him space to approach the spring. Marcus moved slowly and carefully, keeping his eyes on the pack while he knelt beside the water. It was crystal clear and surprisingly cool, bubbling up from deep underground where it had been protected from the desert heat. He filled his water containers and used one of his purification tablets. Though the water looked clean enough to drink without treatment, the predators watched him drink with what seemed like curious intelligence rather than hunting instinct. When he was finished and began to back away, the pack leader approached the spring again and resumed drinking as if nothing had happened. Over the following days, Marcus established a routine. He would visit the spring during the coolest parts of the night, always finding the pack there but never being threatened. The creatures seemed to operate on some kind of water-sharing protocol, taking turns to drink and allowing other species access during certain times. He began to notice other desert dwellers as well. Small lizard-like creatures that scurried between rocks during the early morning hours, larger bird-like animals that soared overhead on enormous wings, riding the thermal currents that rose from the superheated sand, and occasionally he glimpsed something else moving in the distance, larger shadows that seemed to walk upright but always disappeared before he could get a clear look. The water source was a game changer, but Marcus still needed food. The alien predators were clearly successful hunters, bringing back kills to share with their pack. But Marcus was not equipped to hunt six-legged deer-like creatures that could outrun him across sand dunes, nor did he want to compete with the pack for prey that might be limited. Instead, he focused on the plants he had found. Using his multi-tool to carefully harvest small amounts of different vegetation, he began testing them for edibility. His military survival training had taught him how to safely sample unknown plants, taking tiny amounts, waiting for reactions, gradually increasing intake if no negative effects occurred. Some of the desert plants were toxic and made him violently ill. Others were so bitter or tough that they were essentially inedible. But a few showed promise, particularly a succulent-like growth that stored water in thick, fleshy leaves and had a mildly sweet taste. By the end of his first week on Zirion 7, Marcus had established a sustainable survival routine. He had access to clean water, had identified several edible plants, and had learned to coexist with the local predators. His shelter was secure and comfortable, and he had even begun to enjoy the stark beauty of the desert landscape. But on the 8th night, as he made his regular trip to the water source, Marcus discovered something that would change his understanding of this supposedly uninhabited world forever. Footprints in the sand near the spring, not the paw prints of the predator pack or the claw marks of the lizard creatures. These were clearly the prints of feet, small, delicate, and humanoid, with 5 toes arranged in a pattern that was almost familiar but not quite human. Someone else was sharing this desert with him, and they were intelligent enough to walk upright and approach the water source when he was not around. Marcus knelt beside the tracks, his mind racing with possibilities. According to the Galactic Council's records, Zirion 7 had no indigenous intelligent life, but the evidence was right there in front of him, pressed into the sand by someone who had stood at this very spot just hours before. As he studied the footprints more closely, Marcus realized they were not alone. There were multiple sets of tracks suggesting a group of beings who moved together, and judging by the size and depth of the impressions, they were smaller and lighter than humans, but definitely bipedal, and coordinated in their movements. The council had been wrong about this world. The question was whether these mysterious inhabitants would prove to be friends or enemies to a stranded human who had nowhere else to go. Marcus spent the next 2 days tracking the mysterious footprints across the desert landscape. The beings who had made them were clever, often walking on rock surfaces where they left no trace. But occasionally he would find a partial print in sand or a scuff mark that indicated their passage. They seemed to be following a specific route between the spring and something hidden deeper in the mesa complex. On the 3rd day of tracking, Marcus discovered why he had never seen these creatures during his regular visits to the spring. They came during the day, when the heat was so intense that most sensible life forms sought shelter underground. It was brilliant adaptation. They had the water source to themselves, when other predators were hiding from the twin suns, but it also meant they were enduring temperatures that would kill most species within minutes. Marcus found their trail leading into a narrow canyon that cut deep into the mesa, creating a shadowed passage that offered some relief from the desert heat. As he followed the winding path, the temperature gradually became more bearable and he began to notice signs of habitation. Worn patches on the canyon walls where hands had touched stone repeatedly, small alcoves that might serve as storage spaces, and most tellingly, the faint but distinct sound of voices echoing from somewhere ahead. The voices were high-pitched and melodic, clearly communicating in some form of language, but unlike anything in the galactic databases he had studied. There was a musical quality to the sounds that reminded him of birdsong, but with the complex patterns of intelligent speech. Marcus proceeded cautiously, his hand resting on his plasma pistol, but not drawing it. He had learned from his encounter with the predator pack that many alien species could sense aggressive intent, and he wanted this first contact to go as smoothly as possible. His military training had taught him that survival sometimes depended on making allies rather than enemies. The canyon opened into a larger chamber carved out of the living rock, and what Marcus saw there took his breath away. The space was filled with the most beautiful beings he had ever encountered, and he immediately understood why the footprints had been so small and delicate. There were about 20 of them, and they were undeniably female in their body structure, though clearly not human. They stood roughly 4.5 feet tall, with slender builds and graceful proportions that spoke of a species evolved for agility rather than brute strength. Their skin had a subtle iridescent quality that shifted between pale gold and soft silver, depending on the angle of the light, and it seemed to actually glow faintly in the shadowed chamber. But it was their faces that truly captivated him. They had large, expressive eyes that took up nearly 1/3 of their faces, colored in brilliant shades of amber, emerald, and sapphire. Their features were delicate and symmetrical, with high cheekbones and small, perfectly formed mouths. Instead of hair, they had what appeared to be crystalline fibers that grew from their scalps in cascading waves, catching and reflecting light like spun starlight. They were wearing simple garments woven from some kind of plant fiber, practical clothing that covered them modestly, while allowing freedom of movement in the heat. Some carried tools made from carved stone and metal. Others tended to what appeared to be a cultivation area, where they were growing food plants in carefully maintained soil. Marcus stood frozen in the canyon entrance, afraid that any sudden movement might frighten them, but he was not as concealed as he had hoped. One of the beings, a particularly striking individual with sapphire blue eyes and silver-white crystal hair, looked up from her work and spotted him immediately. She made a soft, trilling sound that was clearly an alarm call, and within seconds every pair of large eyes in the chamber was focused on Marcus. But instead of fleeing or showing signs of aggression, they simply stared at him with obvious curiosity and perhaps a touch of concern. The blue-eyed female stepped forward, moving with a fluid grace that made her seem to float rather than walk. She spoke in their melodic language, her voice carrying notes of inquiry rather than fear or hostility. When Marcus did not respond, she tried again, this time with hand gestures that seemed to be asking if he was injured or in distress. Marcus slowly raised his hands to show he was unarmed and spoke in standard Galactic, hoping they might have some knowledge of the common trade language. I mean no harm. I was exiled here by the Galactic Council. I'm just trying to survive. The beings exchanged rapid conversations in their musical tongue, clearly discussing what to do about this unexpected visitor. The blue-eyed female seemed to be some kind of leader or senior member of the group, as the others deferred to her opinions. She approached Marcus cautiously, stopping about 10 feet away and studying him with those remarkable eyes. When she spoke again, her voice carried different inflections, and Marcus realized she was trying to communicate in broken standard. "You are human?" she asked, struggling with the unfamiliar sounds. Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes, my name is Marcus. What are you called?" "We are Lumina," she replied, touching her chest with one graceful hand. "I am Zara." She paused, then asked with obvious concern, "You are dying?" The question caught Marcus off guard until he realized how he must look to them. After nearly 2 weeks in the desert, he was sunburned, dehydrated despite access to the spring, and had lost noticeable weight from his limited diet. To their eyes, he probably appeared to be on the verge of death. "I am surviving," he said carefully, "but it is difficult." Zara turned to her companions and spoke rapidly in their language. The discussion seemed to involve some disagreement, with several different opinions being voiced at once. But gradually a consensus seemed to emerge, and Zara turned back to Marcus with what he thought might be a smile. "Come," she said, gesturing for him to enter the chamber. "We help." Marcus stepped into their hidden sanctuary, immediately feeling the temperature difference as the chamber was significantly cooler than the canyon outside. The Lumina gathered around him but maintained a respectful distance, their large eyes studying every detail of his appearance with obvious fascination. Zara led him to a section of the chamber where water flowed from a crack in the wall into a carved basin. But this was not the same water he had been drinking at the spring. This was somehow different, with a faint luminescence that matched the glow of their skin. "Sacred water," Zara explained, her standard improving as she spoke. "Healing properties. Good for desert sickness." She filled a cup carved from some kind of crystal and offered it to Marcus. He hesitated for a moment, remembering his caution with unknown foods, but something in her expression convinced him that she genuinely wanted to help. He drank and immediately felt a cooling sensation spread through his body. His sunburned skin stopped aching. His dehydration headache faded, and he felt more alert and energetic than he had in days. "Incredible," he murmured, staring at the empty cup. "What is this?" "Our gift," Zara said, then struggled to find the right words. "We are connected to life force of planet. Water carries healing energy." As Marcus looked around the chamber with fresh eyes, he began to understand that this was not just a hiding place. It was a sacred site. The Lumina were not merely surviving on this harsh world. They were somehow symbiotically connected to it, able to tap into resources and energies that were invisible to other species. The Galactic Council had been wrong about Zarion 7 in more ways than one. This was not an empty punishment world. It was home to a remarkable species that had evolved in harmony with one of the galaxy's most hostile environments. And for reasons he did not yet understand, they had chosen to help him survive. But as Marcus would soon discover, the Lumina had problems of their own, and his arrival might be the key to solving a crisis that threatened their entire way of life. The beings who had exiled him expected him to die alone in the desert, but instead he had found potential allies who needed exactly the kind of help that humans were uniquely qualified to provide. The real test of human worth was about to begin. Over the following days, Marcus learned that his arrival had created quite a stir among the Lumina community. They had been aware of his presence since the day he landed. Their connection to the planet's life force allowed them to sense major disturbances in the desert ecosystem. But this was the first time any of them had encountered a member of another species, let alone a human. Zara became his primary teacher and guide, helping him understand their language while improving her own standard Galactic. Her people were naturally gifted linguists, their musical voices capable of producing sounds that most species could barely hear, let alone replicate. Within a week, Marcus was able to communicate in basic Luminan, though his pronunciation made several of the younger females giggle behind their hands. The Lumina society was fascinating in its complexity. They lived in extended family groups led by the eldest and most experienced females, with decisions made through consensus rather than authoritarian rule. Each individual had a specialized role based on their particular connection to the planet's energies. Some were healers who could channel life force through water and plant matter. Others were cultivators who coaxed food plants to grow in impossible conditions. A few were what they called weather singers, able to sense changes in atmospheric pressure and temperature that allowed them to predict the violent sandstorms, but it was their warrior scouts that interested Marcus most. These were the Lumina who ventured furthest from their safe havens, monitoring the desert for threats and resources. They were led by a striking female named Lyra, whose crystal hair was a brilliant shade of copper red, and whose emerald eyes held a fierce intelligence that reminded Marcus of the best soldiers he had served with. Lyra was initially suspicious of Marcus, viewing him as a potential threat to her people's security. But when she saw how quickly he adapted to their ways and how eagerly he shared his own knowledge of survival techniques, her wariness gradually transformed into professional respect. "Your people are warriors," she observed one evening as they sat together watching the sunset from a ledge overlooking the desert. "I can see it in how you move, how you watch for danger. But different from us," Marcus nodded. "Humans have been fighting for survival for most of our history. But we also believe in protecting others, especially those who cannot protect themselves." Lyra's expression grew thoughtful. "This is why the council exiled you? For protecting others?" "Yes. They said I should have followed orders and let innocent beings die. But I could not do that." It was during these conversations that Marcus began to understand the true scope of the problems facing the Lumina. Their species had once numbered in the thousands, living in harmony with Xerion 7 for millennia. But over the past century, their population had dwindled dramatically. The sacred sites that powered their abilities were failing one by one, and many of their traditional territories had become uninhabitable even by their standards. The cause was a mystery that their wisest elders could not solve. The planet's life force was being drained away by something they could not identify or locate. Without it, the Lumina would lose their connection to the healing waters and cultivation abilities that allowed them to survive in the desert. Within a few generations, they would face extinction. "We have searched everywhere," Zara explained as she showed Marcus a detailed map carved into the chamber wall. "Every sacred site, every deep cavern, every ancient ruin. The source of the drain remains hidden." Marcus studied the map with growing excitement. It was incredibly detailed, showing geographic features and underground passages that would have taken surface surveys years to catalog. But it also showed something else, a pattern that the Lumina, focused on their spiritual connection to the planet, had missed. "This area here," he said, pointing to a region marked as forbidden territory. "You say none of your people go there?" "The cursed lands," Lyra confirmed with a visible shudder. "Our ancestors declared them off-limits generations ago. The life force there is wrong, twisted, and it drives our people mad if they stay too long." Marcus had seen similar patterns on Earth, areas where technological interference created dead zones and natural electromagnetic fields. What if something is buried there? Something artificial that is interfering with your planet's natural energy? The suggestion caused an immediate stir among the gathered Lumina. The concept of artificial interference was foreign to their understanding of how the universe worked. They saw all energy as connected in a vast web of life, not as something that could be mechanically manipulated or disrupted. But Marcus was thinking like a human engineer rather than a mystical being. If something was draining the planet's energy, it had to be going somewhere. And if it was affecting specific locations while leaving others untouched, it was probably artificial rather than natural. "I need to see these cursed lands," he announced, causing several of the Lumina to make distressed sounds. "Impossible," Zara said firmly. "The twisted energy will kill you within hours. Even our strongest warriors cannot endure it for more than minutes." "But I am not Lumina," Marcus pointed out. "If this is artificial interference, human technology might be immune to its effects, or at least resistant enough for me to investigate." The debate that followed was intense and emotional. The Lumina were terrified of losing their first alien friend to the same forces that were slowly destroying their world. But Marcus could see hope growing in their eyes as they considered the possibility that an outsider might be able to do what they could not. It was Lyra who finally settled the matter. "I will guide him to the border of the cursed lands," she announced. "If the twisted energy affects him as it does us, we turn back immediately. If not—" She paused, meeting Marcus's eyes with determination. "Then we find out what is killing our world." Preparations for the expedition took 3 days. The Lumina crafted special equipment for Marcus using their knowledge of desert survival and their ability to imbue objects with protective energies. Zara worked around the clock to create concentrated healing potions that might counteract any harmful effects he encountered. The cultivators provided specially treated food that would sustain him even if the twisted energy prevented normal nutrition, but the most valuable preparation came from the knowledge sharing between Marcus and the warrior scouts. He taught them human military tactics for reconnaissance and infiltration, while they shared their intimate knowledge of the desert's hidden dangers and secret pathways. The night before their departure, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. He sat in the main chamber, watching the gentle glow of the sacred water and thinking about the strange turn his life had taken. 3 weeks ago, he had been a disgraced exile dropped onto a wasteland to die. Now he was part of a desperate mission to save an entire species. Zara joined him in the quiet chamber, settling beside him with the graceful movements that had become so familiar. "You are afraid," she observed, not as a question but as a simple statement of fact. "Yes," Marcus admitted, "but not of dying. I am afraid of failing your people, of not being able to help when you need it most." She studied his face in the soft light, her sapphire eyes reflecting depths of emotion that transcended language barriers. "This is what makes humans special," she said softly. "You fear failure more than death. You choose to help strangers even when helping costs you everything. Is that really so unusual? In the galaxy, yes. Most species help only their own kind, and only when it benefits them. The Council called you primitive for acting on emotion rather than logic." Zara smiled, an expression that transformed her already beautiful features into something that made Marcus's heart skip. "They do not understand that emotion guided by wisdom is the strongest force in the universe." As dawn approached and the time for departure drew near, Marcus realized that he was no longer just fighting for his own survival. He was fighting for the preservation of something precious and unique. A people who had found harmony with one of the galaxy's harshest worlds, and who had chosen to trust their fate to a human stranger. The Galactic Council had exiled him to prove that humans were weak and unworthy. Instead, he was about to prove exactly the opposite. But first he had to survive whatever awaited him in the Cursed Lands and solve a mystery that had baffled the Lumina for generations. The real adventure was just beginning. The journey to the Cursed Lands took Marcus and Lyra 2 days of hard travel across some of the most treacherous terrain on Zirion 7. They moved during the cooler night hours, resting during the day in whatever shade they could find among the increasingly twisted rock formations that marked the approach to the forbidden territory. Lyra proved to be an exceptional guide, her warrior training evident in every movement. She navigated the desert with an intuitive understanding that went beyond mere knowledge. She seemed to feel the landscape around her, sensing safe paths through areas that looked identical to Marcus's untrained eye. Her copper-red crystal hair caught the starlight as they traveled, creating a beacon that helped him follow her through the darkest hours. But as they drew closer to their destination, Marcus began to notice changes in his companion that worried him. Lyra's usual fluid grace became more stilted, and she frequently paused to touch her forehead as if fighting off a headache. Her emerald eyes, normally bright with intelligence and determination, grew clouded and unfocused. "The twisted energy," she explained when Marcus asked about her condition. "Even this close to the border, I can feel it affecting my connection to the life force. It is like poison in the air." Marcus felt nothing unusual, which only confirmed his theory that the interference was specifically targeting the Lumina's psychic abilities rather than affecting all life forms equally. This was definitely artificial rather than natural, a technological disruption designed to sever the connection between the planet's indigenous species and their source of power. On the morning of the 3rd day, they reached the border of the Cursed Lands, and Marcus understood immediately why the Lumina considered this area forbidden. The landscape ahead of them looked fundamentally wrong, as if reality itself had been twisted by some malevolent force. The rocks were the same red sandstone as the rest of the desert, but they had been shaped into impossible formations that hurt to look at directly. Spires twisted in directions that seemed to violate the laws of physics, while canyons opened into depths that appeared to have no bottom. The sand itself had a grayish tint and moved in patterns that followed no wind currents Marcus could detect. Most disturbing of all was the silence. In the normal desert, there was always some sound, the whisper of wind over sand, the distant call of nocturnal hunters, the subtle settling of rocks as they cooled. Here the silence was absolute, as if sound itself was being absorbed by whatever force controlled this place. Lyra stopped at a cairn of stones that marked the traditional boundary. Already pale from the energy effects, she now looked genuinely ill, swaying on her feet as waves of disorientation washed over her. "I cannot go further," she admitted, her musical voice strained with effort. "The twisted energy will drive me mad within minutes. Even now I can barely think clearly." Marcus studied the terrain ahead, noting what appeared to be a path winding between the impossible rock formations. "I will go alone from here. How long do I have before you must return to safety?" "I can wait until the next sunset," Lyra replied. "After that, the exposure will cause permanent damage to my mind. If you are not back by then, I will be back," Marcus promised, gripping her shoulder in what he hoped was a reassuring gesture. "And I will have answers." Crossing into the cursed lands was like stepping into an alien dimension. The moment Marcus passed the cairn boundary, reality seemed to shift around him. The twisted rock formations appeared to move when he was not looking directly at them, and shadows fell in directions that had no relation to the position of the twin suns overhead. But unlike Lyra, Marcus felt no psychological effects from whatever force was causing these distortions. His human mind, apparently lacking the psychic sensitivity that made the Lumina vulnerable, simply processed the bizarre landscape as another type of hostile environment to be navigated and understood. He followed the winding path deeper into the forbidden territory, using his multi-tool to mark his route so he could find his way back. The further he went, the more obvious it became that this was not a natural phenomenon. The rock formations, despite their impossible appearance, showed clear signs of artificial modification. Tool marks were visible in places where the stone had been carved, and the overall layout suggested a deliberate design rather than random geological processes. After several hours of careful exploration, Marcus reached what appeared to be the center of the cursed lands, a circular valley surrounded by the tallest of the twisted spires. And there, half buried in the gray sand, he found what he had been looking for. The structure was clearly of alien origin, but not Lumina construction. It was made from some kind of dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and its design was coldly functional rather than artistic. Multiple antenna arrays projected from the central housing, all pointing in different directions across the planet's surface. Marcus approached the device carefully, his military training making him cautious of potential defensive systems. But whatever automated protections it might have once possessed had apparently failed long ago. The metal housing was corroded and pitted, with several of the antenna arrays broken or missing entirely. Using his multi-tool, Marcus was able to access what appeared to be a maintenance panel. The technology was unlike anything in current galactic databases, suggesting it was either very old or from a species that had not yet made contact with the galactic community. But the basic principles were recognizable. This was a power harvesting device, designed to tap into and redirect energy sources. As Marcus studied the internal components, the full scope of what he was seeing became clear. This was not just a simple energy collector. It was a terraforming device designed to systematically drain the life force from an entire planet and transmit it elsewhere via subspace communications arrays. The implications were staggering. Some unknown species had secretly placed this device on Zerion 7, probably centuries ago, and had been slowly stealing the planet's energy to power their own world or civilization. The Lumina's decline was not a natural process. It was the result of deliberate technological theft on a planetary scale. But the device was clearly malfunctioning. Several key components had failed, causing the energy drain to become erratic and creating the psychic interference that made the area uninhabitable for the Lumina. If it had been working properly, they would never have sensed anything wrong until it was too late to save their species. Marcus spent hours documenting the device with his multi-tools recording functions, taking detailed images and sensor readings that he could show to the Lumina elders. But more importantly, he began to understand how the system could be disabled. The power harvesting array was connected to the planet's energy grid through a series of deep drilling points that tapped into geothermal sources. If those connections could be severed, the device would lose its ability to drain the planet's life force. The challenge was that the drilling points were located throughout the cursed lands, and some were probably buried too deep to reach with simple tools. But Marcus had an advantage that the device's creators had never anticipated. Human engineering was based on the principle of controlled destruction, using carefully applied force to reshape the environment to human needs. And Marcus had military experience with demolitions. The power harvesting device had been designed to be permanent and self-maintaining. Its creators had never considered that someone might want to blow it up. As the day wore on and the time approached for his return to Lyra, Marcus formulated a plan that would require all of his human ingenuity and the full cooperation of the Lumina community. It would be dangerous, requiring multiple trips into the cursed lands and the construction of improvised explosive devices from materials they could gather in the desert. But it could work. And if it worked, the Lumina would be free from the artificial drain that was slowly killing their world. Marcus made his way back through the twisted landscape as the suns began to set, his mind racing with calculations and possibilities. He had found the source of the Lumina's problems, and more importantly, he had found a way to solve them. When he reached the boundary cairn, Lyra was waiting for him with obvious relief and desperate curiosity. Her condition had deteriorated during his absence, and she was barely able to stand without support. "You found something," she said, reading the expression on his face despite her weakened state. "I found everything," Marcus replied grimly, "and now we are going to fix it." The hardest part would be convincing the Lumina elders to let him destroy what their ancestors had considered a sacred mystery. But Marcus was confident that once they understood the truth about their world's decline, they would give him whatever support he needed. The galaxy had exiled him to this desert to die, but instead he was about to save an entire species from extinction. It was exactly the kind of outcome that would prove human worth to the Galactic Council, if he survived long enough to tell them about it. Ancient alien device sent shockwaves through the entire Lumina community. For generations, they had accepted the slow death of their sacred sites as some kind of natural cycle or cosmic judgment. Learning that it was actually technological theft committed by an unknown species changed everything. The emergency council meeting lasted through the night, with elders from all the surviving settlements gathering in the main chamber to hear Marcus's report and examine the evidence he had collected. The images of the power harvesting device were passed from hand to hand, studied with the kind of intense focus that Marcus had only seen in military briefings. Elder Celestia, the oldest and most respected of their leaders, spoke for the assembled group. Her crystal hair had turned pure silver with age, and her ancient eyes held depths of wisdom accumulated over centuries of life. "This explains much that we did not understand," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality of her people but weighted with profound sadness. "The pattern of site failures, the strange disturbances in the deep places, the increasing difficulty of maintaining our cultivation areas. More importantly," Marcus said, spreading out the technical diagrams he had sketched, "it can be stopped. The device is old and partially malfunctioned. If we can destroy the primary drilling connections, the entire system will collapse." Zara leaned forward to study the diagrams, her sapphire eyes bright with hope and determination. "What do you need from us?" Marcus had spent days working out the details of his plan, considering every resource available and every possible complication. "I need access to your chemical stores, anything that can be used to create explosives. I need teams of your best climbers and diggers to help me reach the drilling sites, and I need time to build the devices we will use to destroy the harvesting array." The request for explosive materials caused immediate concern among the elders. The Lumina were fundamentally a peaceful species, their entire culture built around harmony with their environment rather than domination over it. The concept of deliberate destruction, even for a good cause, was alien to their way of thinking. But Lyra spoke up from where she sat recovering from her exposure to the cursed lands. "I have seen the twisted energy with my own eyes. I have felt what it does to our minds and spirits. If Marcus can stop this theft of our world's life force, then we must give him whatever help he requires." The debate continued for hours, but gradually consensus emerged. The younger Lumina, those who had grown up watching their world slowly die, were eager to try anything that might restore their people's future. The elders, while more cautious, could not argue with the evidence that Marcus had provided. By dawn, the decision was made. Marcus would lead a mission to destroy the power harvesting device, with full support from the Lumina community. The preparation phase took nearly 2 weeks. Marcus worked with the Lumina's chemists to create explosive compounds from materials available in the desert environment. The process was challenging, as their knowledge was focused on gentle cultivation and healing rather than destructive chemistry. But Marcus's military training included extensive experience with improvised explosives, and he was able to guide them through the creation of compounds that would be effective against the device's metal construction. Meanwhile, teams of warrior scouts mapped the exact locations of all the drilling sites throughout the cursed lands. This was dangerous work, as prolonged exposure to the twisted energy field could cause permanent psychological damage. But the Lumina volunteers rotated in short shifts, pushing themselves to the limit of their endurance to gather the intelligence Marcus needed. Zara coordinated the logistics, her natural leadership abilities proving invaluable in organizing such a complex operation. She worked tirelessly to ensure that every team had the supplies and equipment they needed, while also preparing the concentrated healing potions that would help the scout teams recover from their exposure to the energy field. The most challenging aspect of the mission was training the Lumina in the use of explosives. Their delicate nature and lack of experience with destructive technology made them nervous around the devices Marcus was creating. But their determination to save their world overcame their natural reluctance, and soon Marcus had a team of competent assistants who could handle the explosive charges safely. The night before the mission, Marcus found himself once again sitting by the sacred water with Zara, but this time they were not alone. Lyra joined them, along with several other young Lumina who had become his closest friends during the preparation period. The chamber was filled with a sense of anticipation and anxiety that transcended species barriers. "Are you certain this will work?" asked Kira, one of the youngest scouts, her amber eyes reflecting worry and hope in equal measure. Marcus considered the question seriously. "I am certain that the device can be destroyed. I am certain that destroying it will stop the energy drain, but I cannot be certain of what will happen afterward. Your world has been under artificial influence for so long that restoring the natural energy flow might cause unexpected changes." "Good changes?" Zara asked. "I believe so. But change is always dangerous even when it is positive." Elder Celestia appeared at the chamber entrance, moving with the dignity that came from centuries of leadership. "The stars are aligned favorably," she announced. "Tomorrow will be the optimal time for your mission. The energy flows will be at their weakest point in the cycle, giving you the best chance of success." The mission began before dawn, with teams deploying to 6 different locations throughout the cursed lands. Marcus led the primary assault on the central device, accompanied by Lyra and 4 of her best warriors. The other teams would simultaneously attack the outer drilling sites, ensuring that the entire network was destroyed at once. Moving through the twisted landscape was even more difficult with a full team, but the Lumina's natural agility and grace served them well. They moved like dancers through the impossible terrain, their feet finding purchase on surfaces that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. As they approached the central valley, Marcus could see that the device was more active than it had been during his first visit. The antenna arrays were glowing with an eerie light, and the air around the structure shimmered with energy discharges. Whatever malfunction had been limiting its effectiveness was apparently getting worse, which could either help or hinder their mission. The first explosive charges were placed at the outer drilling points, with Lumina teams working in carefully coordinated shifts to minimize their exposure to the twisted energy field. Marcus watched through his multi-tools communication system as each team reported successful placement and withdrawal to safe distance. The most dangerous part of the mission was approaching the central device itself. The energy field around the structure was so intense that even Marcus, with his apparent immunity to psychic effects, began to feel disoriented and nauseated. But he pushed forward, determined to complete the mission that could save an entire species. Lyra and her warriors provided cover and support as Marcus placed the largest explosive charges directly against the device's power core. The metal housing was harder than he had expected, requiring him to use shape charges that would focus the blast energy precisely where it would do the most damage. As he worked, Marcus became aware of a new sound cutting through the absolute silence of the cursed lands, a deep, thrumming vibration that seemed to come from the device itself. as if it was responding to the presence of the explosive charges. "It knows what we are doing," Lyra observed, her voice tight with strain from the energy exposure. "Then we had better finish quickly," Marcus replied, attaching the final detonator to the largest charge. The withdrawal to safe distance was a race against time. As the device's energy output continued to increase, the twisted landscape around them began to change even more dramatically, with rock formations shifting and reshaping themselves in real time. It was as if the ancient machine was trying to defend itself by making escape impossible. But the Lumina's knowledge of the terrain, combined with their natural agility, allowed them to navigate the changing maze of stone and sand. They reached the designated safe zone just as Marcus activated the detonation sequence. The explosion was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. Instead of a simple blast, it was as if reality itself convulsed around the destruction of the power harvesting device. Light and sound became confused, gravity seemed to fluctuate wildly, and the very air shimmered with released energy. When the chaos finally settled, the cursed lands had been transformed. The impossible rock formations had collapsed into more natural shapes. The gray sand had returned to its normal red color, and the oppressive silence had been replaced by the ordinary sounds of wind and settling stone. Most importantly, the device was gone. Nothing remained but a crater filled with twisted metal fragments and the sweet smell of ozone from discharged energy. As the teams regrouped and began the journey back to Lumina territory, Marcus could see immediate changes in his companions. Their movements were more fluid, their eyes brighter, and their crystal hair seemed to glow with renewed vitality. The artificial drain on their world's life force had been ended, and the natural energy was already beginning to return. The mission had been destruction of the power harvesting device was nothing short of miraculous. The planet's natural life force, freed from artificial constraint, began flowing again with unprecedented strength. Sacred sites that had been dormant for decades suddenly blazed with renewed energy, and the Lumina found their abilities enhanced far beyond their ancestors' wildest dreams. Marcus watched the changes with wonder and deep satisfaction. Springs that had been mere trickles became flowing streams. Plants that had struggled to survive in the harsh desert began to flourish, creating oases of green in previously barren areas. The predator packs that had shared the water sources with him grew larger and more active, sensing the return of natural abundance to their world. But the most remarkable transformation was in the Lumina themselves. Their population, which had been declining for generations, suddenly stabilized and began to grow. Young couples who had been afraid to have children in a dying world now spoke excitedly of starting families. The elders, their life force renewed by the restored energy flow, became more active and engaged than they had been in decades. Zara had become Marcus's constant companion during this period of renewal, helping him document the changes and serving as his liaison with the various Lumina settlements. Her sapphire eyes sparkled with joy and gratitude whenever she looked at him, and Marcus found himself falling in love with not just her beauty but her intelligence, compassion, and strength. "You have given us back our future," she said one evening as they sat together watching the sunset paint the desert in brilliant colors. "How can we ever repay such a gift?" "You already have," Marcus replied. "You saved my life when I was dying in the desert. You trusted me when you had no reason to do so. You fought beside me to save your world. That is payment enough for any man." It was during one of these peaceful interludes that the sky above Zarian 7 suddenly filled with the distinctive energy signatures of ships dropping out of hyperspace. Marcus counted at least a dozen vessels, including several that he recognized as Galactic Council enforcement ships. His exile period was not scheduled to end for another 24 years. So this unexpected visit could only mean one thing: someone had been watching. The lead ship transmitted a standard communication request, and Marcus found himself once again speaking to the obsidian-skinned counselor who had sentenced him to exile. But this time, the alien's expression was very different, less arrogant, more curious, and perhaps even concerned. "Marcus Chen," the counselor said, his four eyes studying Marcus's improved appearance and the Lumina settlements visible in the background. "We have received some very interesting reports about activities on Zarion 7. Reports that suggest you have not merely survived your exile, but have somehow thrived in it." "I have had help," Marcus replied simply, gesturing to indicate Zara and the other Lumina, who had gathered to witness this unexpected development. The counselor's eyes widened as he took in the sight of the Lumina for the first time. Impossible. Our surveys indicated that Xerion 7 had no indigenous intelligent life. Your surveys were incomplete, Marcus said. The Lumina have lived here for millennia. They are a remarkable people who have achieved true harmony with their environment. What followed was a series of tense negotiations, as the Galactic Council team insisted on landing to conduct their own investigation. Marcus was concerned about potential interference with the Lumina's recovery, but Elder Celestia convinced him that this might be an opportunity to introduce her people to the wider galaxy on their own terms. The landing party included not only council members but also scientists, archaeologists, and even a few reporters who specialized in covering galactic affairs. They were clearly expecting to find a primitive society struggling to survive in harsh conditions, not the sophisticated civilization that the Lumina actually represented. Dr. Viridian, the chief xenobiologist on the council's team, was particularly fascinated by the Lumina's connection to their planet's life force. This is unprecedented, she explained to the assembled council members after conducting initial studies. They have evolved a form of symbiotic relationship with their environment that allows them to literally channel the planet's energy for healing and cultivation purposes, but it was the discovery of the destroyed power harvesting device that truly shocked the investigation team. The alien technology was identified as belonging to the Zephyrians, a species that had mysteriously vanished from galactic society over 3 centuries ago. Apparently, they had been conducting secret terraforming operations on dozens of worlds before their disappearance, slowly draining planets to power their own civilization. You mean to tell us, said the mantis-like counselor, that a single human not only discovered this ancient threat, but successfully destroyed a device that our best scientists would have difficulty even understanding? With help from the Lumina, Marcus emphasized. This was not something I could have accomplished alone. The tree-like counselor who had participated in his sentencing spoke up. According to our analysis of the device remnants, the power drain was accelerating. If it had not been stopped, this entire planet would have been rendered lifeless within another generation. Elder Celestia stepped forward, her ancient dignity commanding immediate respect from even the most arrogant council members. Marcus Chen saved not only our world but our entire species. He risked his life to enter the cursed lands when none of our own people could endure the twisted energy. He shared his knowledge freely and fought beside us to destroy the device that was stealing our future. The lead counselor's expression had become increasingly thoughtful throughout the investigation. Marcus Chen, when we exiled you to this world, it was because we believed humans were too impulsive and emotional to be trusted with important decisions. We expected you to die here as proof of your species' weakness. Instead, said Dr. Viridian, he has demonstrated exactly the qualities that make humans valuable to the galactic community: adaptability, courage, and the willingness to help others even at personal cost. The willingness to act when action is needed, added the Mantis counselor, rather than endlessly debating protocol while innocents suffer. Marcus felt a surge of vindication, but he kept his expression neutral. Does this mean humanity's probationary status will be reconsidered? The obsidian-skinned leader exchanged glances with his fellow counselors before responding. More than that, based on what we have observed here, the Council is prepared to offer humanity full membership, including a permanent seat on the governing body. The implications were staggering. Full membership would mean human colonies could be established throughout the galaxy. Human ships could travel freely in all sectors, and human representatives would have a voice in decisions affecting countless species and worlds. But Marcus looked around at the Lumina settlements, at the people who had become his friends and allies, and at Zara, whose love had given his life new meaning. I am honored by the offer, he said carefully. But I need to discuss this with my people here before making any decisions. The council delegation remained on Xerion 7 for several more days, conducting detailed studies of the Lumina culture and the restored planetary ecosystem. They were particularly interested in the Lumina's sustainable technology and their methods of living in harmony with their environment, knowledge that could benefit countless other worlds throughout the galaxy. During this time, Marcus found himself in the strange position of being courted by the same beings who had exiled him in disgrace. Council members who had previously dismissed humans as primitive now sought his opinions on galactic policy. Scientists who had considered his species intellectually inferior asked detailed questions about human problem-solving methods, but the most meaningful conversations were with Zara and the other, Lumina, about what the future might hold. The galaxy was vast and full of opportunities, but Zerion 7 had become home in a way that Earth had never been. The choice between galactic importance and personal happiness was not an easy one. "Whatever you decide," Zara said as they stood together under the brilliant stars that no longer seemed hostile but welcoming, "know that you will always have a place here. You are not just the human who saved our world. You are one of us now." In the end, Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He accepted humanity's elevation to full galactic membership and agreed to serve as their first representative on the council. But he also negotiated for the establishment of a joint human-Lumina research station on Zerion 7, dedicated to studying sustainable technology and planetary restoration. The Galactic Council had exiled him to a desert, expecting him to die forgotten and alone. Instead, he had found love, purpose, and a way to prove that human values of courage, compassion, and cooperation were exactly what the galaxy needed. As the council ships prepared to depart, carrying news of humanity's new status to worlds throughout the galaxy, Marcus stood with Zara watching the sunset paint the desert in brilliant colors. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight they could simply enjoy the beauty of a world reborn and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest victories come from the willingness to help others, regardless of the cost. The stars looked different now, not as distant points of light but as destination,